I think that returning to a healthy American polity will include recovering a healthy household polity. I don't think you can have one without the other. And blue collar, lower middle class, hardworking people who do things with their hands just kind of get it in their gut. I'm loyal to my parents. I'm loyal to my friends. I'm loyal to my family. I'm loyal to my little town. It may not be the greatest thing in the world, but it's my town.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And very often those folks don't own a whole lot. So what they possess are things that they share in common with other people in their communities, but they're often unable to defend those things because there are interests who are willing to come in and sort of break those communities up, violate the boundaries that those folks cherish and want to keep in place so that they have something to give to their kids. It's not something that they're paying for directly, but it's part of the community that they inherited, they'd like to pass on to their kids. So that kind of thing, I think, is what we ought to be focusing on as conservatives.
Howdy, everyone. Welcome back to Moment of Truth, the podcast of American Moment. My name is Nick Solheim. I'm the co-founder and COO of American Moment, and I'm joined by not anyone. My erstwhile Indian companion is on the road, so you're stuck with me for today. But I had the great pleasure of having a conversation with CR Wiley, Pastor Chris Wiley from Battleground, Washington State, not Sodom on the Potomac. It was a great conversation, but before I get to that, just want to plug a couple things from American Moment. So first of all, if this is your first time listening to our podcast, please go to americanmoment.org. We also have a form on there, americanmoment.org/join. If you're looking to get involved, you fill it out. You'll get a meeting with someone on our team. We'll find a way to get you plugged into the movement, maybe get you a job in DC, an internship, whatever. So I would highly recommend that you do that. We also have another form on our website, americanmoment.org/AM Fridays. If you are currently an intern on Capitol Hill or in the conservative movement in DC, we're doing a series of training lunches in the one of the Senate buildings. We provide a boxed Chick-fil-A lunch. And we'll be having a series of very exciting speakers, including Stephen Miller, the former director of the Office of Management and Budget, Russ Vogt, and a bunch of other really exciting people. So if you're an intern listening to this and you haven't gotten involved in that program already, please reach out. We'd really love to have you. The conversation that I had with CR Wiley today, we were focused on a lot of different things. We talked about kind of the resurrection of the blue-collar household, and really the death of productive households in the West, generally speaking, and how we can kind of return to the way that America used to be. So it was a very enlightening conversation. I actually ran into Chris. We both happened to be in Branson, Missouri at the same time a couple months ago. And so I just sent him a message on Facebook and said, "Hey, I loved your book. Would love to get together with you." And he graciously obliged. So we got together and I spoke at Fatherhood Intensive in his congregation in Battleground, Washington a couple weeks ago. And then we were very delighted to have him here in Washington, D.C. To be on Moment of Truth. CR Wiley is the senior pastor of the Presbyterian Church in Battleground, Washington. He's written for Touchstone Magazine, Modern Reformation, Sacred Architecture, The Imaginative Conservative, and Front Porch Republic. His short fiction has appeared in the Mythic Circle, and he has published much young adult fiction. He also wrote the book Man of the House, as well as The Household and the War for the Cosmos, and most recently, The House of Tom Bombadil, which is very great. I was actually talking with one of our studio folks here, and he's going to buy that book. He was very excited to read it. He has been a commercial real estate investor and a building contractor, and he has even taught philosophy to undergraduate students. Chris is a very interesting guy. I think very highly of him, and I think that you guys will really enjoy this episode. So we will go now to CR Wiley. Chris, thanks for coming on the pod.
Yeah, glad to do it. Good to be with you, Nick.
So kind of first question we ask every guest that we have on this show, who is CR Wiley? How did you get where you are?
Yeah.
And what are all the things that you're working on?
Well, okay. Well, I in terms of childhood, grew up in a kind of bohemian world for the first part of my life. My father was, he worked at University of Buffalo and then later at Washington U in St. Louis, kind of very junior faculty work. So the world that I grew up in at that point in my life was a world full of people. This is late 60s, early 70s, people who were all seeking themselves. If you get my drift,
Yeah.
It's kind of the beginning of the me decade. And everybody seemed to think that they would find themselves in California. So they would get up and go look for themselves there, that kind of thing. And it was a period too where, helicopter parenting just wasn't even a concept. We had a lot of freedom, too much. And so I spent a lot of time kind of out with my friends and so forth. But eventually my father's peregrinations landed him in the Church of Scientology. So I spent time as a kid in that world, and it's as weird and as bad as everybody thinks. And eventually our family broke up. My mother was in and out of mental health care for the rest of her life. I spent time as a ward of the state, lived in housing projects and so forth, spent time in foster care. This was kind of weird in a sense because my extended family on my father's side is actually fairly well-to-do, but they didn't really have any connection to what my day-to-day life was like or anything like that, and there wasn't much communication. But anyway, it's out of that kind of social milieu, that kind of atmosphere of chaos that my formative years occurred during those times, during that period. And it was when I was a teenager that I became a Christian. My own aspirations at that point in my life were to be a comic book artist. I wanted to go and do cool, stories about, I don't know, Fantastic Four or whatever. And I was pretty good. I've been in and out of art schools as a kid. My extended family is made up of artists and academics. Same thing, by the way, ironically, is true for my wife. But anyway, that was sort of the milieu in which I found myself, and then I was converted. And that was an episode of my life that was important for a range of reasons. One, it was in Western Pennsylvania, which is a very blue-collar part of the world. And this was, late 70s, so there was still a strong sort of blue-collar factory ethos to the place. And the church I was converted in was a blue-collar, small church. And I grew to really admire and respect the people, particularly the men, that I met in that world. They were very different from the world that I had been exposed to when I was younger in places like St. Louis and so forth. So my affection for blue-collar people and the kind of the blue-collar mindset that you see in, say, the Rust Belt developed during those years. Then I went to college in Boston, and for the better part of my adult life lived in New England between Boston, Cape Cod, and Connecticut. And it was during those years that I served churches in Cambridge. I lived in Cambridge and worked in Cambridge, Massachusetts, between Harvard and MIT and Central Square. Got there in the late 80s, early 90s when it was still kind of gritty. There was still rent control. It was kind of a different place than it is today. Mm-hmm. Served a church there that was really a lot of fun. It was very dynamic, people from all over the world. We had 5 congregations at any given time, language-based congregations. And it was during that period of my life that I was involved in urban ministry and education. Spent some time at Harvard Divinity School and taught philosophy at a local Christian college there on the South Shore. Those years were formative for me in the sense that I flirted a little bit with liberation theology and some stuff on the left, kind of Saul Alinsky, Paulo Freire stuff in the early 90s, but it was a short episode. And the reason it was a short episode for me was because I had enough actual personal exposure to poverty and to the things that actually make people poor. And so I couldn't be BS'd, if you get my drift, when it came to that kind of stuff. Then there was a kind of freaky, sort of insurgence of sexual revolution stuff that kind of got blended into the left. So back in those days, in the late 80s, early 90s, you didn't see the kind of emphasis on, sexual deviancy that you see today. It was much more sort of a let's just try to help poor people kind of thing. But that's no longer the case. Anyway, it was during those years in Cambridge that I could see what we see today, sort of an embryo. So you could say that I was briefly woke and then got over it, mainly because I could see what it was leading to. Particularly during my time at Harvard Divinity, it was a kind of a taste of the world to come, and I didn't like how it tasted. And that is actually what prompted kind of the second phase of my writing career, and when I started working on things related to productive property and households and so forth, because those were things that I think provide the kind of bulwark and the kind of grounding that makes it possible to resist the things that we see in all around us right now. So anyway, that's what prompted my book, Man of the House, and then Household and War for the Cosmos, and even my recent book on Tom Bombadil.
Yeah.
So I write for a lot of different publications. I've written for Touchstone. I've written for the American Reformer. I've written for World Magazine. I write for different, publications that would be very sympathetic to American moment, kind of on the same page with you guys on a lot of things.
Yeah. So tell us a little more about your kind of political maturation over time. Growing up in a blue collar area, what were kind of the issues that put you where you are today? And I'll preface this by saying, there are a lot of pastors, I think, across a lot of denominations that are not super politically engaged. They think that's not a sphere for pastors or for churches to be in. Right. But even the ones that are skew a lot more libertarian than I think you do. So can you tell us a little more about how you kind of frame yourself in that spectrum?
Yeah. Well, I guess I like Buchanan, Pat Buchanan. So that kind of tells you something about the way I look at the world. Yeah. I think you've got a book here by Pat. Yeah. The Great Betrayal.
Yeah.
What a great title. I've not read it, but I think I know what he's getting at.
Yeah.
But I do think that a number of people who are inclined to a more libertarian approach to things live in their heads too much, and they don't have a kind of sympathetic, heartfelt conservatism that identifies with groups of people and is considering what is in their best interest. So another retreat into principle. Yeah. So you can advocate, maybe open borders as an economically, it's sort of a formula for, prosperity. But when people are put out of work that because they're now competing with people for work who are willing to work for a lot less, and maybe are living in almost subhuman conditions. I'm not exaggerating, like 15 people to a house that's got 3 bedrooms. That stuff occurs. Now, for those folks, to give them credit, I admire the sacrifices they make. I think they're often very hardworking people who come to this country to make a better living for themselves. But at the same time, we've got folks here that we're cashing in for those folks. And
Yeah.
let's just be honest. We've put a price on the blue collar folks in our country, and we've said basically we're willing to cash you in for people who do the same work you do, but are willing to do it at a lower price, and that's what's happened. So, in terms of my own commitments to sort of the conservative cause, I have a kind of an approach to things, a way of thinking about things, a way of feeling about things that I think a person like a Pat Buchanan really does a good job of describing and advocating for. A sense of these people are our people. We shouldn't cash them in. They're capable of a lot more than maybe we think they are, and we need to invest in them. And so it's about being a good neighbor. It's about being a good employer. It's about being a good American.
Yeah. I think as it relates to kind of the core constituency of libertarians, and even a lot of neoliberals on the left, is kind of this high performance, like hedge fund managers, finance people, and
people who put a dollar sign on everything.
Right. What do you think is the and I envision I know what you're going to say, but what is or what should be the core constituency of conservatives in the conservative movement?
Yeah, well, I think the core constituency ought to be people who are dedicated to just core traditional sort of patterns of life. Institutions, the household is one of those institutions.
Yeah.
You don't see many people in the libertarian world defending, say, the household on any other grounds than maybe, I don't know, it's a center of consumption. Or maybe it's a place where we can educate kids and not have to rely on public schools. And that's fine. That's a fair thing to say, and I agree with it. But I think there's a lot more to say for the household than that. And I think that very often, maybe it's less the case today than it was, but I think very often blue collar, lower middle class, hardworking people who do things with their hands just kind of get it in their gut. I'm loyal to my parents. I'm loyal to my friends. I'm loyal to my family. I'm loyal to my little town. It may not be the greatest thing in the world, but it's my town.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And very often those folks don't own a whole lot. So what they possess are things that they share in common with other people in their communities. But they're often unable to defend those things because there are interests who are willing to come in and sort of break those communities up, violate the boundaries that those folks cherish and want to keep in place so that they have something to give to their kids. It's not something that they're paying for directly, but it's part of the community that they inherited, they'd like to pass on to their kids. So that kind of thing, I think, is what we ought to be focusing on as conservatives. I think the economic stuff in terms of, ever greater measures of prosperity, those things, that thing in particular is good, but it has to be kept in a kind of proper relationship to other things that you can't put a price tag on.
Yeah, people are worth a lot more than graphs.
Yeah, and even traditions are worth a lot more than people are willing to admit. So, a lot of small towns in America have, little sort of low budget traditions that make them, that are important to the people who live in those places, but don't make anybody rich. And in some cases are looked at as sort of a speed bump on progress.
Yeah.
So we're going to just get rid of that stuff.
Yeah.
Or we're going to try to compromise, or we're going to try to introduce something to it that's alien.
Yeah. What are good examples of those things?
Well, I think, you can even look at, say, big cities like Boston, and you can look at, say, St. Patrick's Day parade in Southie, which, Southie is very much, that's South Boston for those who don't know.
Yeah.
It's very much kind of a small town feel. It's peninsula that sticks out, into the Atlantic, and there's only a couple ways in and out, and it's been largely colonized by the Irish, and it's been that way for a long, long time. And so when they celebrate their Catholic faith or they celebrate their Irishness, there are a set of traditions that have been handed down to them that they want to perpetuate, and there are certain interest groups that want to like get in on the action and promote their thing.
Yeah.
And I think you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
And initially there's a strong kind of pushback, but then they're browbeaten and just humiliated and excoriated in the press. And eventually they're unable to sustain their traditions because of that kind of pressure. Yeah.
One of the pushbacks to this argument that I've heard, and I obviously disagree with, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. You know, this idea that we kind of need to prioritize our base, you know, the working class, blue collar people in this country, is that is increasingly a vanishing category of people. You know, we live in a country now where, and you know, I believe that this decline was a choice, but a place where, you know, many people have email jobs and cubicles and that sort of thing. What do you make of that argument?
I think it's stupid.
At least you're honest.
I think it's a stupid argument because what we've done is not develop a society that doesn't rely on people doing certain things. Mm-hmm. We've just cashed in one group of people for another group of people to do the same sorts of things who are willing to do them for less money. So, you know, for example, when I was a kid, you know, there were lots of opportunities to do things with your hands, you know, landscaping, roofing, those kinds of things. And they were valuable things to get into, not only because, you know, you could earn a little money, but they had a way of introducing you to the physical world, and being introduced to the physical world reminds you that you just don't always get your way. Mm-hmm. The physical world is intransigent oftentimes, and teaches you things that you need to learn if you're going to be wise. Now, there are a lot of folks who've come to our country who are hardworking people, honest people, trying to make a living, but there's been a kind of favor that they've enjoyed from certain elites in our country, and there's another group of people who are on the losing side of the equation. I think that, you know, we can put a stress on training and educating young people in the trades, return to a strong emphasis on that. People don't all have to go to college. In fact, a lot of folks who end up going to college do so simply because they kind of feel like they have to in order to get the certifications that they need. Then they walk away with $50,000, $60,000 in debt, and they're trying to teach kindergarten for $24,000 a year, something like that. Yeah. But that they were forced into that. Anyway, so you're right. I think there were a set of priorities that people kind of promoted and pushed, and there was a failure to push back. I think in the last 10 years, I've seen some things that are encouraging in that regard. I think obviously Trump's appeal to that community is significant indication that those folks didn't go away, that they're still there. But I also think people like Mike Rowe and Dirty Jobs and things like that, there's just been, you know, a lot of things here in the last 10 years, as I said, that have come about that I think have been a good reminder to, you know, our civic and political leaders that, you know, we need to return to a strong emphasis that supports people getting into these areas, and then being able to actually make a living doing these things, right? Yeah.
What do you think is the pathway for getting, you know, young people interested in these jobs again? I mean, you hear all the time that, you know, millennials and Gen Z is so lazy. You know, they don't want to do anything. And like you've said, you know, we have kind of outsourced a lot of these manual labor jobs, things like landscaping, construction, and that sort of thing to immigrants. How do you kind of incentivize the generations, you know, to really prioritize this kind of work?
Well, I think this is where fathers, parents in general, but particularly fathers, are important. So to give you a little bit of insight into how I worked with my own kids in this matter. So I have 3 grown children. They're all married, all have kids. I have my boys have homes of their own that they own with their wives. And my oldest son went to an elite college, and it was a good choice for him. My second son, very bright. He reads Dostoevsky on his lunch break. He's that kind of bright. But he's a welder and a foreman for a major steel firm in the Hartford area. But when he was, getting out of high school, we would get together and have lunch, once a month and kind of talk about different things. He asked me what I thought he should do. I said, you should take a gap year, and during that gap year, go to trade school. And then he said, well, what should I study? And I could see, even as a little guy, that he had a real way with his hands. He was very good in terms of his spatial reasoning, in terms of his working with his hands. And he was efficient in his movements. I had been a framer for a while, and I wasn't efficient in my movements. And the guys that I worked for would tell me that. But I remember seeing him in action and thinking, this kid's kind of got it. He, might want to give college a try, but I think maybe his calling is, working with his hands and the trades. And so they asked me what I thought I should do. I said, something dangerous. The reason why you want to do something dangerous is because somebody is going to be afraid to do it themselves, and they'll pay you to do it.
Yeah.
The problem with guys who go into being like house painters is everybody thinks they know how to paint.
Yeah.
It's like, I painted my bedroom once. Yeah, you did an awful job, but you don't know how bad it was because you don't have an eye for what it really should look like.
Yeah.
But that's the trouble with certain trades. But welding generally kind of spooks people. And I think working with electricity or plumbing, those kinds of things. So I encouraged him to do that. And anyway, he's only 25, and he oversees 25 men today as a foreman in the company that he works with.
Wow, that's incredible. I'm interested to hear if you think, most fathers, and we can kind of delve into the topic of the book you brought up earlier, but first I want to hear about if you think fathers know their sons and daughters well enough and know these sorts of things to steer them in that direction, because I think there is this kind of brainworm in kind of the Gen X and Boomer generation where you have to go to college to make it at all. Right. And I think that's a very deeply held belief, and it's I think held in a good intention. You want your kids to be successful, but do you think fathers know well enough to be able to do the kinds of things that you did with your children?
I think there are 2 ways that fathers can kind of go wrong in this, and then there's, I think, a different way to go that I think I pursued. So one way you can go wrong is that there are guys who were blue collar guys who wanted their kids to go on and do something more, I guess, lucrative or something with more status. And so you saw that a lot back in the day. You don't see it as much today. Yeah. But you saw it a lot back in the day where, say, a guy who was a framer or whatever said, don't do what I'm doing, it's taking such a toll on my body. You should be a doctor or something like that. That's great. I mean, doctors are we need them. But they kind of sold themselves short. Then on the other side, you've got people who are sort of cubicle gophers. They live in cubicles all day. People that we make fun of in the office and stuff like that.
And office space and all these. Yeah.
Right. And they really don't have any personal exposure to the world of the trades. And so consequently, They don't know what to look for in their kids. They wouldn't know where to steer them. And they might even think of it as kind of a step down in status.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want my kid to do that. It would be, embarrassing for me,
Mm-hmm.
to tell people at the office that my kid is a welder, which is really goofy. But the third way, I think, which I think is a really fruitful way, is if, let's say you're a person with education, and you actually start to do things with your own hands. This is, what we see with Matthew B. Crawford and Shop Classes Soulcraft and all of that.
Yeah.
Marvelous thing about that book, Shop Classes Soulcraft, is here you have a guy I could relate to in certain ways because his parents were academics. He grew up in Berkeley, So think about it this way. So his parents were kind of hippies. and you're growing up in Berkeley. How do you rebel when your parents are hippies and they teach at Berkeley? Well, you subscribe to Soldier of Fortune magazine. That's how you rebel. And you get into welding and working on cars. And that's exactly what Crawford did. Now, eventually he went on to get his PhD in political philosophy at the University of Chicago. But he became a motorcycle mechanic and an electrician, and is still, I think, very much involved in those things today and loves that stuff. So if you can like say, okay, I went to Harvard Divinity School, I can say that. I've got relatives who have been academic deans at major institutions. I am completely unimpressed with that stuff. I've got relatives who are very wealthy. Money's nice, but yeah, that's just grandpa. That kind of thing. So if you got that kind of security in terms of your self-understanding, and then you start working with your hands, you discover that there's a whole world out there that you are really stupid and are inept in, and you grow in your appreciation for the people who are adept in it and who are wise and know how to work with materials in their hands and are good craftsmen, and consequently you become a fuller person. You become a better sort of embodiment of that Aristotelian ideal of a man in full, and when that occurs, then you end up in a situation where you can actually say to your, the son that, has an ability to work with his hands, hey, pursue that. I will be proud of you if you become a real craftsman. Yeah. And the kid will know it, So my kids, I've got kids who kind of reflect different features of my own life and background. And I love the fact that they're pursuing their callings in these different areas, and I'm proud of them for doing those things, and they're doing a really good job, each of them. So, but in my mind, being able to work with your hands and having real skill is way up there in terms of what ought to be respected and regarded. And it's a shame that more people don't think that way.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Speaking about the household and kind of the way we raise our children and disciple them, I want you to talk a little bit about your book, The Household and the War for the Cosmos. It was actually the first Canon Press book I ever read. Uh-huh. I'm a big fan of it, but and we'll put a link in the description for people who want to be able to pick up a copy of that. But tell us a little bit about the thesis of that book. What is the household? Why does it matter in our modern context?
Yeah, well, it was a real pleasure to write the book, and the occasion for the book was a address I gave at a conference in Chicago, and it was a real honor to speak at the conference. The theme was patriarchy. Mm-hmm. And there, other speakers who were there were people like Anthony Esselin and Nancy Piercy and Robert P. George. And it was kind of a star-studded lineup, and they inserted me. So I was like, okay, what am I going to talk about with all these great people in attendance? And I audaciously decided I wanted to do something on the Aeneid. And I'd been of the conviction for some time that we don't have a full appreciation for how the early church both understood and challenged kind of the prevailing story of the empire. And so anyway, the Aeneid, of course, is the story of Aeneas. It's written by Virgil, and it's intended to be kind of the Roman, kind of Homeric epic about the founding of the Roman state, initially the Republic and eventually the Empire. And it was commissioned by Augustus. Mm-hmm. And the express intent behind it was to tell the story of Rome and how it came to be master of the world and why that was a good thing, that kind of thing. So, but premised, or one of the important premises of the book is that Aeneas is the embodiment of piety. So he's referred to as pious Aeneas. Mm-hmm. So that's his appellation. That's how he's referred to throughout the book. Now, if you were to talk to somebody today, if they're even aware of the term piety, they think of it as something that their grandmother, sort of embodies as she sits in her rocking chair and reads her Bible and prays for her grandchildren, which is great. Mm-hmm. That is a picture of piety. But in the first century, this great warrior, this demigod, this guy who was the son of Venus, for goodness sake, mm-hmm. according to the legend, he was the personification of piety. So what did the Romans, what was sort of in view when Romans thought of their founder as a pious man? Well, it meant that you performed your duty. Let that sink in. So a man who performs his duty, and duty being understood as being making a return to your benefactors. So obviously your parents are benefactors. You owe them. Your city and the city fathers, you owe them. They're benefactors. And ultimately the gods, and of course as Christians, the one true God, we recognize that God ultimately is the one who is our benefactor. But for Romans would be the pantheon, Jupiter and so forth. So that's the story. It's the story of Aeneas embracing his duties and performing in a way that satisfies the demands of duty. And the picture of that, sort of the visual image of that we see in the Aeneid that exemplifies it, is when Aeneas carries his father out of Troy as it's burning to the ground. Mm-hmm. So this is an interesting story because you're hearing it from the Trojan perspective. Yeah. So Odysseus is a bad guy. Yeah. Hated, and but anyway, so you're getting it from the perspective of Aeneas, and he doesn't want to leave the city initially, even though it's burning down all around it, because his father refuses to leave. Mm-hmm. And sort of the turning point is when Jupiter gives them a sign from heaven that Ilius, his son, Aeneas' son, will be the father of a new people, a new nation, the Roman people. And so there's a crown of fire that appears on his head. And at that moment, Grandpa says, "We're good to go." Yeah. We're good to go. But he's a cripple. So Aeneas has to carry his father on his back and then lead his son by the hand, and in his other hand there's a sword. And he leads him out. He leads, his father and his son out of the city. This is the picture of a pious man, who is serving his father and his son and perpetuating the line. And this was something that found its way onto Roman coins. So if you see, many coins that were circulating in the time of the New Testament, you'd have Augustus on one side, and then you'd have on the other side the image of Aeneas with his father on his back. Mm-hmm. So that was in the back of my mind, or sort of not actually in the back of my mind, but in the front of my mind when I was writing Household and the War for the Cosmos. And my approach is that the early church thought about piety in much the same way, and that you have two, you could say, visions of the future, two founding fathers, Aeneas and Abraham, and both have a claim on the world, the cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
So the word that we translate into the English word world is the Greek word cosmos, and it simply meant the order of things at the biggest level. So the war for the cosmos is this war for, the highest place in the cosmos, which is being seated in heavenly places. And Christians maintain that Christ, after his resurrection, ascended into heaven as seated at the right hand of the Father. Romans would have gotten what that meant.
Yeah.
That was a political claim,
Mm-hmm.
because they believed that Caesar was seated in heavenly places with the gods. And we actually have carvings from the first century, which were contemporaneous with the early church, of Caesar seated in heavenly places. So there was a political kind of dimension to the Christian faith from the start. And that's another thing to keep in mind. Pontifex Maximus, the priestly role of the emperor,
Mm-hmm.
was something. So our notions of the separation of church and state, they just didn't buy into, baby.
Yeah.
They thought, they saw, there was like almost no space between, the religious and the political in their minds. And when Christians made a claim like they did, that Christ is Lord, they knew what that meant.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it was a threat. That's why Christianity was a threat. But anyways, so the purpose of the book, The Household War for the Cosmos, is that we carry forward household polity, like we see outlined in the New Testament in books like Ephesians and Colossians, because our household polity reflects the larger polity of the cosmos.
Yeah. So walk us through, bringing this to an American perspective, the difference in, the households that existed, say, at the founding or late 18th century, and then the, ebb and flow of that over time and where we're at today.
Well, you can say with certainty that what we see during the colonial period and right up to the Revolution is a lot closer to what you saw in Rome and in Israel than what we see today.
Mm-hmm.
If you watch a film like The Patriot with Mel Gibson, I imagine with this audience, probably a familiar film.
Yeah, yeah.
But you can see him as the man who represents his house in the public square in the deliberations concerning whether or not, we should fight the British in the story and that kind of thing. And then how he orders his home, how he works with his family, how he works with his sons in particular. There was a sense of solidarity and common life and common work that you saw in that household that is not the case in most households today. With the advent of the Industrial Revolution, the workplace is now someplace else than the household. So my contention is that a number of the things that we see in our culture at large that are just insane have to do with the fact that we no longer think of our households as centers of productive activity, but just as recreation centers. Mm-hmm. And, when it comes to recreation, taste, you're talking about, well, you're into this, I'm into that. That's why we need to have separate televisions in every room.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And we don't do anything really together except maybe eat. And even then, we're, calling out for pizza delivery or something. We're not even making food together.
Yeah.
So there's just a lack of work that binds households together in the way that they were bound together in the past. Now, I think that there are a number of positive developments in the last, say, 30 years. I think that we're seeing a recovery almost by necessity as people lose faith in the educational system, public education. People are taking the responsibility of educating their kids, on and getting much more directly involved through homeschooling and so forth. But also elder care. I mean, I hear about people who are charged like $30,000 a month for their the care of their parents, and like how many people can afford that,
Yeah.
And the numbers are growing. We got more and more old people relative to the rest of the population, and it's going to be that way for a long time. This is forcing us to recover certain things that were taken for granted and just done in the past.
Yeah.
So I see some positive developments, but we're still in the midst of this sort of recreational mindset where we think about work as something people do someplace else for money, and the stuff that we have at home is just for, our time off.
Yeah. What do you think about the household as sort of a political unit?
Oh, yeah. Well, a lot of the work that I did focused on the household as it was understood in antiquity. You see it in Aristotle's Politics, Xenophon's Oikonomikos, or Economicon, where you saw that the basic economic unit and social unit of the, say, Greek city-state or, say, the Roman Republic was the household. Mm-hmm. And that's why it was understood to have a kind of a measure of autonomy, and why the head of house was looked at as a person invested with authority, unlike you see today, where almost it's assumed that parents hardly even have a right to require certain things of their children or what have you. So things were very different, and I think that returning to a healthy American polity will include recovering a healthy household polity. I don't think you can have one without the other.
Yeah. What do you think in terms of public policy solutions to kind of regaining this idea of a productive Christian household, aside from culture and the way that, congregations, affect culture? What do you think governments or public policy officials should be looking at?
Well, I think there needs to be, first of all, a forthright and unapologetic support for the institution of the household. Mm-hmm. So government needs to respect its boundaries. So the burden of proof has always got to be on the government to justify any intervention. In other words, when we think about, say, just normal legal matters, someone is innocent until proven guilty. Mm-hmm. Well, we ought to think of households as being competent until demonstrated otherwise. That kind of thing. So or the parents have the right to exercise authority unless they demonstrate just gross negligence or, do something horrible to the kid. And then the burden of proof is still on the state. We're almost in a situation where it's the reverse, where a parent almost has to prove that he or she has the right to exercise authority in a child's life, or even in the financial affairs of a household and how it's maintained and governed. If we are able to recover a sense of what this means, I think it will lead to a recovery of, or a valorization of, parental authority, particular a father's authority. One of the reasons why fathers are a target, particularly of the left, is because historically fathers have put a check on statist ambitions, saying this far and no farther will you come. And generally speaking, in the past, fathers have had enough resolve and even physical ability to make it work that way.
Yeah.
So fathers often are demoralized, parodied, made light of, because it helps to further this, the process of centralization of authority and strengthens the hands of the state, and particularly the administrative state.
Yeah. Tell us more about all your other writing projects right now. I know you're working on several books.
Yeah. Well, I'm working on a commentary on the Book of Acts, which will actually get into some of the themes that I addressed in the Household and War for the Cosmos. But another one is a book on risk, and you and I have talked about that. I think, we need to have, a way of thinking about the world that acknowledges risk is inevitable, that there's no such thing as risk-free life. In fact, the riskiest form of life, or the riskiest thing you could possibly do, is pursue a risk-free life.
Yeah. Because
that just basically means you're sloughing off all of the tough decisions onto somebody else who are, they're going to take their cut.
Yeah.
And then you're just going to be left with what's left over. And sometimes they'll take their cut, even if they've not done anything for you that's increased your wealth or whatever. But there's that. I'm working on a book. It's a children's picture book, and doing the illustrations for that. And then I've got a book on totalitarianism that I'm working on. So I've got way too much I'm doing.
Yeah.
But, chipping away at these different projects.
Yeah. So I'm particularly interested in the, like you were saying, we've talked about this book on risk, and I'm very much looking forward to it. I won't put too much pressure on you to get it out quickly, but the book on risk and the book on, resisting authoritarianism, and you can kind of take them in two separate pieces, but what was the genesis for both of those?
Well, it largely was my own life, I guess. There came a point in the late 90s where I could see that what at that time we didn't call cancelization, but we do call today being canceled, could happen to me. And so I thought, okay, I need to find a way to become cancel-proof. And in order to do that, I will need to have productive property so that I can support my family. At that time, my kids were all under the age of like 8.
Yeah.
And my wife was a stay-at-home homeschooling mom. And I thought, well, this is not going to happen overnight. So I got involved in commercial real estate, built up a pretty fair portfolio. I had 18 tenants at one time while I was a full-time pastor, and was also teaching philosophy. I had a lot more energy in those days. But
that's why the beard's all white.
That's right. Yeah, it's true. But anyway, in order to do that, I had to take some risks. And, I've got a number of stories about the risks I took, but they weren't crazy risks. They were risks that were weighed, and there was a lot of thought that went into the risk. But you may have heard the term paralysis of analysis. There are a lot of folks out there who just spend way too much time trying to answer every question. You have to have a kind of, there's a sense in which you've got to know when you know enough to take a step, and risk something. One of the things I've thought about with regard to this is I was thinking about writing something on the money virtues. Virtue is a word that we normally associate with moral goods like honesty and timeliness or what have you. But the older way of thinking about virtue, virtus, which means manliness, which is kind of fun to think about, and it's where we get the word virile. But what it meant was the ability to get something done is essentially what it was referring to. So the virtue of the knife is in the cutting. In other words, the sharpness of the knife is its virtue. Now, if you think about it that way, virtue is more capacious. It includes a lot of different things. And one of the things I saw over the years is that there are a lot of hardworking people out there who just don't know why there are some jerks who get ahead and they don't. Yeah. And what occurred to me is that there are virtues that are moral in character that we expect everybody to have, and they are economically rewarding. I mean, if you're honest and hardworking, you'll often find an employer who rewards you for your work and so forth. But nobody gets ahead just on those things. Nobody. So if you're climbing a ladder of virtue, you could say, the economic virtues, you get to like saving for a rainy day. Yeah. And then the next rung it's like there are about 5 rungs that are missing. Yeah. And then the rung above that is you get into another set of rungs, which I refer to as the money virtues. And one of the money virtues is being able to see value before other people can see it. And that's not something that we expect everyone to be able to do. Certain people can do that. And sometimes they're jerks. But the difference between the hardworking guy that doesn't get rich, and the guy who's a jerk and gets rich is that. But one of those rungs is the ability to take risks, to be able to like step out into a world where you don't have all the answers and you won't have them. Like, do you remember Pirates of the Caribbean, Jack Sparrow? He just kind of is like Mr. Magoo. He's kind of going through, this process of escaping from the authorities. I can't remember, but it's just one thing after another where he's just got perfect timing. And two of the guys who are like watching him escape, they ask, one asks the other guy, does he have a plan or does he make it up as he goes along?
Yeah.
And really, guys who have that entrepreneurial gift, they're able to step out when they don't have it all figured out and trust that they're going to be able to figure it out as they need to.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I'm getting at with risk. And I think there are, I think more people are capable of doing that than maybe many folks assume can do it.
Yeah. And what about the book on authoritarianism?
Well, yeah, it's actually going to be on totalitarianism because there's an important difference between authoritarianism and so an authoritarian is a guy who's like, you do whatever I say, but generally speaking, I'm not interested in micromanaging your life.
Yeah.
Right. So, there have been a lot of authoritarian leaders over the years, and a number of them are jerks, and what have you. But a totalitarian is not satisfied with you doing what he says. A totalitarian wants to control your brain, everything about your life. You are just some cog in some vast machine, and you need to be programmed to kind of get with the program. And so it's ideological in character. Ideologies tend to be kind of cookie cutter. They kind of impress upon reality a sort of a vision for things. They're kind of Procrustean beds, if you're familiar with that image. The bed of Procrustes. If you're too short, you're stretched. If you're too long, you got your feet cut off. That's how ideologies work. And totalitarians will cut off your feet with great enthusiasm for your own good.
Yeah.
Because they think that that's the way to bring in, heaven on earth, to amenitize the eschaton, to make the world a better place. So this is the thing to think about. Never forget, Hitler, Stalin, Mao, they all were humanitarians. They all wanted to make the world a better place.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. I thinking about, totalitarianism, it's pretty easy to identify the things that you're saying, and we kind of live in a totalitarian state today.
It's certainly getting more and more that way. That's for sure.
But what's interesting is it's not even necessarily propped up by a single individual. I mean, our president is practically a vegetable, but it's the administrative state really is the totalitarian in this case. So what would be your advice to people, currently, like most of our listeners are people that either work in public policy or aspire to that work? What would be your advice to them on resisting totalitarianism, not just in their personal lives, but where they are in their career? Yeah,
well, I think we need people like Daniel, like Joseph, who are sort of on the inside. And I know that's one of the things that you folks are trying to encourage people to think about and consider. Maybe you're called to work in that big machine. And as you work in that machine, you can be a conscience. You can be someone who says, I know that you think your motives are pure, but maybe they're not.
Yeah.
Maybe the measures that you're undertaking are actually very harmful to the health of our country and so forth. I mean, think about with COVID. The people who were the most enthusiastic for the COVID measures really thought they were doing us all a favor, and people lost businesses, people lost jobs, and they demonstrated that they were largely wrong about everything they thought would make the world a better place. They've never owned up to it, for as far as I know. I mean, there are a lot of people like you and me who maybe had doubts all the way along who feel like vindicated, but and then there are, I think, a number of people who have been second thoughters. They've said, well, and then there's been one of the things that's been fun to see is people like Naomi Wolf, who have been on the left their entire lives, and then this whole thing happened, and they're like, "What was that all about? That was the dumbest thing I've ever seen." And all of my friends now hate me because I questioned it and that kind of stuff. So there are a number of people who've come around, but I think for a lot of folks, they just wish it would go away. They don't want to own their own complicity in it. They don't want to prosecute anybody. They just want to pretend it never happened. That's kind of where we are. But we need people in the administrative state that says, no, we're not going to just let that fade into the memory hole. We're going to bring it up. Mm-hmm. We're going to go after some people. That we need people like that. Yeah,
totally. As a kind of a final item here, is really interesting. I found out, while you were in town, that you are currently running for city council in your town. Tell us more about that, why you're doing that, and then just as kind of a note on the end, what should political engagement for pastors or people involved in leading congregations be? It's not something you see very often these days.
Yeah. Well, I think a couple things come to mind. So this is for city council in the town of Battleground in Washington. So it's not too far from Portland. I can get in the car at my house and be at the Portland airport in half an hour. Mm-hmm. The community itself is a great little town. I've fallen in love with it. I've been there. I'll be 3 years by the time the election occurs. The reason I got into it is somebody asked me to. Mm. So I wasn't like I was sitting around looking for something to do. Yeah. And initially when I was asked, I said, man, I'm really busy. I don't think I can do that. Yeah. And then he said, well, it's going to only be this and this and this. And he kind of talked me into it. I was like, oh, okay, I'll do it. In terms of pastors' involvement in political affairs, I think we have a great example of how that can work with John Witherspoon, one of the founding fathers of our country, who was a Presbyterian pastor. He was a college president. He was at that time the president of the school that would eventually become Princeton. And he, I think served his country and served his Lord at the same time through his ministerial work, but also through his work as an educator and as a politician. So I don't have this sense that these are incompatible. I think there can be mutually reinforcing. They're different callings, and perhaps I'm not called to this. If I don't win the election, that's perhaps evidence that I'm not. Yeah. But if I do win, perhaps that's evidence that I am. I believe in God's providence. So, in terms of what I think about as my role in Battleground, is I think it's a great place. It's a town that's full of kids who still ride bikes in the street, healthy homes, safe neighborhoods, locally owned businesses, lots of kind of local character. It's just a marvelous place. Yeah. And the last thing we want to see is the Portlandification of Battleground. Yeah. So if there's any way I can serve Battleground, it'll be in trying to preserve its essentially conservative character. It's a very conservative town. I've told people that it may be the most Christian town I've ever lived in. Mm-hmm. It's got great, coffee shops. It's got great, brew pubs and stuff like that. It's got great consignment shops. My wife and my daughter and my daughters-in-law just love it. Mm-hmm. But, it's seeing a huge influx of people from other places. And, I'm concerned that we, getting back to the work of a conservative, actually conserving something that's beautiful. Yeah. I think Battleground deserves to live, to survive as a great little town. Yeah.
I was there with you a couple of weeks ago, and it is, was only there for a short period of time, but it truly is a delightful place. Chris, where can people keep up with you and all your writings and really keep track of the things that you're working on?
Well, I'm on all kinds of social media. There's Twitter. I mainly just share things that I thought were kind of interesting there. And I don't say a whole lot.
Yeah.
I'm on Facebook. I've got maybe 7,500 followers on Facebook. And then I do have an author page that I never update, crwiley.com. But if you're interested in maybe seeing some interviews with me and maybe reading some reviews of things I've written, you can go there. When I get my other books done, I'll post them there.
Okay.
But those are probably the best places to find me.
Great. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Yeah. Well, Nick, it's been great. I enjoyed the conversation.
I told you that would be a very enlightening episode. Chris is a man of many talents, and I would highly recommend that you go and check out all of his works that he plugged at the end, and be on the lookout for some of his new books. He's got 4 books he's working on right now that'll be coming out in the coming months and the next year. So I would highly recommend that you keep an eye out for those. As always, make sure to subscribe to Moment of Truth. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the little bell so that you're notified whenever we have a new post. Once again, our website is AmericanMoment.org. If you're a young person looking to get involved in the movement, maybe looking for an internship or a new job, please reach out to us at AmericanMoment.org/join. And then, as always, rate and review the pod. 5 stars really helps, I promise. And thank you all for watching the show. We'll see you next week.
Moment of Truth is an American Moment Studios production filmed at the Conservative Partnership Center. Our podcast is produced and edited by Jake Mercier and Jared Cummings. Our intro music is A Minor Struggle by Ryan Serenich. Don't forget to like and subscribe on all platforms, and you can go to AmericanMoment.org to learn more.